Hi, I'm your host, Bree Wild, and this is Marquee Memories. Here we sit down with your favorite artists to chat about their top concert memories as fans. Since the 1980s, today's guest has been a prolific fixture in American rock, starting out with David Allan Coe and Dickie Betts, then joining the reformed Allman Brothers Band before forming his own band, Government Mule. He's also an acclaimed solo artist, releasing his first album in nearly a decade last year. Grammy-winning guitarist, singer-songwriter extraordinaire, Warren Haynes. Welcome.
Thank you.
Would you like to add anything to that ultra-condensed resume?
No, I would like to subtract some stuff, but that's another story.
Nice. Before we get to the first memory, I heard they named a guitar after you. What goes into getting a guitar named after a person?
Well, I have a new signature model Gibson Les Paul that we've been kind of working on for a while. I've done a couple in the past, but I guess they weren't considered signature model guitars. They were considered inspired by guitars.
Okay.
I'm not even sure really what the difference is.
Did you have more say in this one then?
Not really, but it's different. You know, I have a great relationship with Gibson guitars. I've played Gibson all my life, and they've just been really wonderful to me through the years. So when they first started approaching me about making a signature model Les Paul years ago, maybe decades ago, my first reaction was, well, there's only one Les Paul. Les Paul invented the electric guitar, and I happen to play a Les Paul guitar. There's nothing really special about it. So I kind of prolonged the conversation, and eventually they were like, well, if you come up with some stuff about yours that's very different. So we were able to make a Les Paul that was different than normal. And then they also copied my 1961 ES335 and made a signature model of that. But this new guitar is the first actual, I guess what they're calling signature model, that's more in full production. And so, and it's an honor to do that. We're talking technical shop now, but the big difference being it has P90 pickups instead of humbucker pickups, and that's not normal, but I really like it a lot. I think they did a fantastic job.
Cool. Congratulations. Well, let's go to your first memory. Grateful Dead, North Carolina, Charlotte Coliseum, 1979. Set the scene.
I don't have a lot of memories of that. It was my first Grateful Dead show.
Okay.
And I wasn't really a Deadhead. You know, my oldest brother had a few Grateful Dead records and a few Jerry Garcia solo records. And I had heard a lot of that music in the background, but I had kind of taken a different turn from a fan perspective at that point. But a bunch of musicians that I was playing with at that time, we had a band and we had an old school bus that we traveled in, and it was terrible. It would go about 58 miles an hour, and so we were late everywhere we went. But we took our school bus down to see the Grateful Dead at the Charlotte Coliseum in 1979. And my biggest takeaway was the audience. I had never seen an audience like that. It was like, I felt like I was tripping just watching the crowd. And I remember being up in the balcony and looking down at the people twirling and doing the Grateful Dead dance, and just thinking, wow, this is something I've never experienced before.
There's a Grateful Dead dance?
I think there's a type of dancing. I don't know if you can actually call it dancing, but it's a form of expression.
Fair.
But I only remembered, I think they played Terrapin Station, which later became maybe my favorite Grateful Dead song. But fast forward years later, when I started playing with Phil Lesh in the late 90s, we were having a conversation and I brought up that show and he said, yeah, I remember that show. And I said, well, for some reason, it's not in dead bass. And dead bass was usually very thorough, but my first show was not in dead bass forever. And I mentioned it to Phil and he was like, we have to get to the bottom of this. So I don't know who he talked to, but somebody made it their mission to go check that out. And then a year or two later, it appeared in dead bass. And I looked and it said Terrapin Station. I was like, yep, I didn't make that up.
Did we find out anything in the investigation of why it wasn't in there? Just slacking?
I don't know the answer to
Okay.
that. I don't think anybody got fired or anything.
And what was your like status as a fan afterwards? Like, did you become a bigger fan after seeing them live?
I didn't really become a big fan until somewhere around 1989, so about 10 years later. I was just starting to hear more and more of the songs that I thought were great songs. And then I met my wife about that time, and she was a Deadhead, so she was playing me some stuff as well. And I came through it, I came into that scene more as a fan of how many great songs they had, because I've always said, they created something special from a jam situation and their connection with their audience. But without those great songs, I don't think it would still have the lasting power that it has.
Right. So you never considered yourself a Deadhead, exactly?
No, not in the
Not at the
old days.
level of.
And I only saw 2 shows total. I saw them again at Foxborough Stadium in outside of Boston in 1993. But I became a huge fan.
Nice. Let's go to Zeppelin Reunion, O2 London, 2007. Set the scene for that one.
That was fantastic for me and for my wife as well. My wife had tickets to see Led Zeppelin in, I guess, would have been 79 when John Bonham died in 79 or 80. Either way, she had tickets to see him at the Capitol Center in Washington, D.C., and John Bonham died, and she couldn't go to the show. I never had the opportunity to see Led Zeppelin in the old days, and they would be at the top of my list of who I would love to have seen. So fast forward, I had been doing some work with John Paul Jones, the bass player. We had played together a few times and become friends. And my wife and I knew that the Zeppelin reunion was happening in London. And we were like, we really should go. It's going to be really expensive, but we should go. We should check into getting tickets. And then I was in San Francisco late night and got an email on my computer from John's manager saying, John would like to invite you to the reunion in London. And we just went, we are absolutely going. And it was so great. The concert itself was fantastic. The band sounded tremendous. But John has an interesting circle of friends, and they were all sitting together. And so we were sitting, my wife and I were sitting with Ben Harper and Laura Dern, who we're friends with, and we all just felt like we were in high school. Like it was like going back in time. And then it would look down and, here's Dave Grohl, and here's James Taylor, and here's Bela Fleck, and all these people, a lot that I knew and some that I was fans of. We were all sitting in the same kind of section, and it was just surreal, I'm so glad that I was able to attend that show.
What did you expect from the show, and what did you get from the show? I know obviously it was a reunion, but a little different.
I think everybody knew it was going to be great, but there was the potential that it might not be as great as we would build it up in our heads,
Yeah.
But for me, it was. I thought it was just so powerful and so impactful. And having not seen them in the old days, I thought it was as close to that as they could deliver. And I was just really blown away with the whole experience. Their catalog is undeniable. And to this day, I mean, not seeing Led Zeppelin with John Bonham is a regret for me, but was never an option.
How long was their set?
I'm guessing a little over 2 hours. I don't know. It was fantastic, and The sound was great, and it just everybody was so excited, you know.
Have you played that venue yourself?
I have not.
Oh, not yet.
Interesting
Interesting.
point.
Bucket list.
Yeah.
Bucket list.
I've played another venue in that complex. They have a theater there, and I played in the O2 theater, but I haven't played in that arena.
Yet.
Good point.
Yet.
Since we're talking about Led Zeppelin, I had never met Jimmy Page until Government Mule did a show in Milwaukee during Summerfest, and we were opening for Jimmy Page and the Black Crowes. And Jimmy came up to us and as we were about to walk on stage and said, "Hey, I want to come watch your set. Can I just walk with you guys?" And we're like, "Yeah, of course. Why would we possibly say no to that?" And this particular venue is very confusing. And the tour manager we had was pretty new, and he didn't really know his way around. So we opened the first door, and it was like a broom closet or something. And we took a detour. We opened the second door, and it took us back to where we were going. And then we opened the third door, and it was wrong. And Jimmy Page quoted Spinal Tap. He goes, "Hello, Cleveland," and which is a famous quote from Spinal Tap. And I thought it was hilarious. You know, we haven't hung out much, but I'm a fan and really loved hearing him play that night. I've only seen Page play 2 or 3 times, and it was great every time. Every time they would go into the next song, we would all just be like, "Oh God, I can't believe they're playing this," and it was really like high school, you know. When they would go into these jams that would be like 70s jams, you know, it would just transport me back, you know, because I still remember the first time hearing the live Dazed and Confused from that live record. It was like nothing I'd ever heard before. And they had stretched out the arrangement so far. And this friend of mine who was a DJ at a college radio station, he had just gotten the record in the mail, and he's like, "Have you heard the live Zeppelin record yet?" And I was like, "No." And he's like, "You haven't heard Dazed and Confused?" I'm like, "No." He's like, "You got to hear it." So we had a little herbal influence and
A little listening party?
And listened to Dazed and Confused, and it just blew my head off. You know, I had never heard anything like that. And so fast forward to hearing them that night, you know, it was just, it was gratifying, you know, in so many ways.
Let's go to Weather Report, Greensboro, North Carolina, 1976, in a hockey rink.
Yeah, I saw Weather Report in 1976. I don't remember the name of the venue, but I remember it was a hockey rink, and which is odd for a few reasons. One being in North Carolina in 1976, I didn't even know they had hockey, but it wasn't like a real venue, so to speak. But the opening act was Al Di Meola, who was really making a lot of noise as a guitar player at that time. He was turning on a lot of young people to jazz fusion and stuff. And I was a fan of his music and also a fan of Weather Report, obviously. So seeing both of those bands back to back was incredible. But something about the Weather Report performance kind of changed my life. I saw music in a more dimensional way. It's kind of hard to explain, but I realized the way they were improvising and the way they were communicating on stage with what's looked at as like musical conversation was heavier than anything I had ever seen. It wasn't like this person's soloing and the rest of the band is backing them up. It was like the entire band was having a conversation, and it kind of elevated me into thinking that's a possibility. You know, that's something I want to learn how to do.
And did you?
Hopefully.
Getting there?
You know, I mean, it's something I've strived for. And yeah, I've been in a lot of bands that have the rare opportunity and chemistry to be able to do that sort of thing. I've been surrounded by wonderful musicians for decades, and there are chemistries that I have with a handful of musicians that are on a level that kind of is definitely taking a cue from that. You know, I would never claim to be on that level myself. But
Now, do you get to go to shows as a fan, or is it like, Warren's here, ask him if he'll play guitar?
well, we're working a lot, you know, so I don't get to go to as many shows as a fan as I would like to. And also, truthfully, because, you know, okay, I got 3 weeks off. The last thing I really want to do is go hang out at a show. But if it's something really interesting, you know, I'll go check it out. And usually there's a way of doing it where you can be kind of private about it. This is going back a couple of years, I guess, but when Mudcrutch did that tour where Tom Petty was playing bass with them, they were playing at the Capitol Theater in Port Chester, New York, and that's pretty near my house. And so I went and watched that show as a fan. The same when the Dixie Dregs did their reunion tour at the same venue, the Capitol Theater. Myself and John Schofield went down and watched the show. They did invite us to sit in, so we wound up playing the encore, but that wasn't our intention. It just happened that way. But I love being able to watch, you know, from either from the side or out front or something. You know, musicians are the biggest fans. That's why we became musicians, because we were geeky fans in the first place, you know.
Yeah, you were a fan of the Allman Brothers before you joined their band, correct?
Yes.
Can you tell that story, even though it's not on the list?
Well, I was a fan of the Allman Brothers from the very beginning. My oldest brother had the first record in 1969. I was 9 years old. I had not started playing guitar yet, but I had started singing a little bit, and I really loved Greg Allman's voice, but I also was starting to kind of get infatuated with guitar, because prior to that, I was only listening to soul music, the Four Tops and the Temptations and Otis Redding and Wilson Pickett and James Brown. So I wasn't listening to the guitar players, I was just listening to the singers. But somewhere around age 9 or 10, I started paying attention to guitar. I loved the Allman Brothers music from the very beginning. Would have never thought, wow, one of these days I'll wind up joining that band, which is something you could never, ever imagine, you know. But I was there for 25 years, and it was an amazing experience. I've always said that if I could join a band that I grew up listening to, the Allman Brothers would be at the top of the list.
You did it.
Yeah.
Now you just have to play the O2, or which theater?
That's a good point.
Yeah, bucket list. Who's still on your bucket list to see?
To see?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow, good question. Jimi Hendrix, Miles Davis. You mean people that are still around?
Yeah.
That's a great question. I don't know who have I not seen that I would want to see. I finally got to see McCartney a few years ago, and it was fantastic. I saw Tom Waits. That was fantastic. I don't know. I'm sure I'm going to regret not remembering something, but I don't know of anything that I haven't seen that I really want to see that's still possible. You know?
What about collaborations? It seems like you can just call up anybody and be like, hey, I want to play with you. I don't know if that's the reality, but it seems like it because you work with a lot of people.
Usually those things come about organically. It's not something that you orchestrate. It just kind of happens right place, right time, so to speak. And, you know, the people we're mentioning, like McCartney and Tom Waits and Jimmy Page, I haven't played with any of those three, nor have I played with Neil Young.
Yet.
But I've been so fortunate to have played with so many people that I grew up listening to that I couldn't possibly complain. But as I mentioned, it usually comes about in happenstance somehow, and I love that. That's the beautiful part about it, is there's kind of a rule in the world of sitting in with people is you don't ask, you wait to be asked, and it doesn't mean that there aren't exceptions, but that's kind of the way I grew up. But having said that, a lot of times at these festivals, when there's so many bands that you're friends with, you're just hanging out and somebody go, hey, you want to get up and play a song? Yeah, of course, I would love to. And we invite people and people invite us, and it's a win-win. The audience loves it because they saw something unexpected, and it's like a reunion for us, except we get to play music,
Yeah, Grace Potter, when she was here, she was talking about getting her sit-in chops.
Yeah.
Who gave you your sit-in chops?
Well, I grew up in Asheville playing at this club where everybody sat in with everybody. Mm-hmm. So at a young age, I was kind of doing that. But I guess once I joined Dickie Betts' band, which led me to joining the Allman Brothers, being in the Allman Brothers opened every door imaginable because, as much as I'm a huge fan, it turns out everybody is a huge fan, and I don't mean that in the normal sort of way. I mean, like musicians, bands all over the world are Allman Brothers fans. So all of a sudden that door was open for me. People that I didn't know a year or 2 years before were saying, "Hey, you want to come join us?"
That's awesome. Speaking of festivals, I heard you have a Woodstock story.
I do have a Woodstock story. Yeah, not the original one. I was 9 years old when that happened. But in '94, when they did Woodstock '94, the Allman Brothers were invited to perform. But it was, I wouldn't say a last-minute invitation, but by the time we were invited, we had already booked that time period, and the day that they wanted us to play, we were booked in Boston at this venue called Great Woods, and the show had been sold out. We said, well, we'd love to play, but we would have to go on at like noon or 12:30 or something, and then go immediately to Boston and play another show that night. And that's the only time, to my knowledge, that the Allman Brothers ever did two shows in one day. It also came on the heels of, at that point, Stevie Ray Vaughan had died in a helicopter crash, and Bill Graham, the legendary promoter who helped break the Allman Brothers, died in a helicopter crash. And they wanted to bring us in a helicopter, and we just collectively said, no, we're not doing that. And they said, well, it might be the only way we can get you in. And we just said, no, it's a deal breaker. We're not doing it. And so I was told the night before, just get on the bus and we'll figure it out. And I woke up backstage at Woodstock, and there was 350,000 people, and it was crazy, And then to kind of shake the cobwebs off and go play a show at 12:30 in the afternoon, which we never did, But I also got a chance to watch Traffic, who was one of my favorite bands, and I didn't know Steve Winwood at that time. We've become friends since and toured together a little bit, but it was fantastic watching them. But we were all thinking the Boston show is going to be tough because we're going to be worn out from all the craziness. But it was the opposite. We felt liberated. By the time we got to Boston, the whole Woodstock experience was behind us, and Boston turned out to be one of the best shows of the tour.
You said it was sold out, right? So I'm sure the audience
the crowd was fantastic.
Just...
The Boston crowd for the Allman Brothers was always fantastic. So both of those shows were really great. What a long day. We didn't have a chance to watch as many of the bands as I would have liked to, because we had to get out.
What has to happen for you to feel like that was a great show, we nailed it?
Usually you can tell right from the beginning, because in all the bands that I work with, improvisation is such a big part of the music, even to the extent of just carrying over to the way we approach the songs themselves. It's like when we talked about Weather Report earlier, it's a musical conversation in the way that we're all listening to each other and paying more attention to ourselves than we are to the audience, really. And that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. And so when it's clicking, when the groove is right and everybody's like on the same page, you can usually tell from the first song. It kind of plays itself. The music just kind of happens and comes through you, and you stop thinking. Thinking is your enemy when you're improvising.
So since we're set list, I just want to ask, so how often do you stick to a set list? Or do you just make room for improv here and there?
Well, we make a set list for every show, and we probably stick to it about 80% of the time. But the interpretation of the individual songs is a different story. But there are nights when we go out and after the second or third song, something just doesn't feel like it's flowing, and someone will turn around. If it's Government Mule, I'll turn around and go, let's play such and such, and we'll go into a whole different direction. So it becomes an audible thing at that point, and that happens quite frequently. Sometimes it's only a song or two, but if you misread the energy of the audience, you can wind up changing the whole set list. We change the set list every night. In Government Mule, we change it drastically. We'll do like 4 shows in a row without any repeats. And my band that I'm touring with currently, we don't have nearly as big a repertoire, so we can't do that. We have a smaller amount of songs to choose from, but we change it up as much as we can. So if someone were to come to 4 shows, they would see a few songs repeated, but not a lot. But in the old days, before everyone was online, we had a big blue binder of every set list we had ever done, and whenever we went to the next city, we would look and see what we played the last time we were there, or maybe the last 2 times we were there, because we felt like it was important to play a different show than people saw the last time. And I don't know to what extent the average fan cares about that, but it's part of our mindset. It starts with making the band happy. If we're feeling inspired and fresh, then the audience can pick up on that. So it's not a selfish thing. Well, it kind of is, but our approach to making the music the best it can be. If we feel like we played a song too many times, we'll give it a rest. And so when we start playing it again, it feels fresh again, But there's no hard rules, it's just music.
Feel it out.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.